The revolving glass door of First Union Bank pushed Thomas Bennett into a world designed to reject him. The
I'll
moment
need
his
those figures by
steel-toed work
tomorrow.
boots touched
I've
polished
just sent you
marble
the latest
conversations
projections.
paused mid-sentence. Eyes traveled the length of his frame from the sawdust clinging to faded denim across calloused knuckles, wrapped around a small hand down to scuffed leather that had walked 1,000 job sites. The air itself seemed to recoil thick with the scent of old money and older judgment. Lily pressed against his leg, 8 years old, and holding on like he was the last solid thing in a tilting universe. Her free hand clutched a teddy bear missing one button eye, its fur matted from too many nights in hospital beds. She looked up at the vaulted ceiling at crystal chandeliers that threw rainbows across walls lined with oil portraits of men who'd never swung a hammer. "Daddy, this place is really shiny." Thomas squeezed her fingers, feeling how cold they were despite the June heat outside. 3 hours ago, she'd been in a chair at County General poison dripping into her veins to keep her heart beating. The nurses said she did great. They always said that like bravery could be measured in how still a child sat while medicine burned through her blood. "It is, sweetheart. Why is everyone staring at us? Because they see the dirt on my hands before they see me. Because your teddy bear doesn't match their leather briefcases. Because we don't belong in places that smell like this. Don't worry about them. We're just here to do something quick, then we'll get ice cream. Remember chocolate. Whatever flavor I want, whatever flavor you want." A security guard near the entrance shifted his weight hand drifting toward the radio clipped to his belt. Thomas noticed, 29 years on construction sites taught you to read body language like blueprints. This man was measuring threat levels, calculating response times. The guard's eyes lingered on Lily's pallor, the dark circles that no 8-year-old should carry. The way she leaned into her father like standing took more strength than she had. The lobby stretched before them, vast as a cathedral and twice as cold. Marble columns rose toward a ceiling painted with clouds that had never known rain. Behind the main counter, tellers moved with the efficiency of people whose biggest worry was lunch breaks. Thomas approached slowly, giving Lily time to match his pace. Her legs had been hurting more lately. The doctors said that was normal. Everything was normal until it wasn't. A young woman glanced up from her computer screen. Her smile was automatic, professional, and died the instant her gaze landed on Thomas's flannel shirt. She looked at Lily next, and something flickered across her face. Pity, maybe, or discomfort at seeing childhood illness this close. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. "Can I help you? I'd like to check my account balance." "Do you have an account with us?" The question landed like an accusation. Thomas kept his voice level, the way you speak to someone holding a nail gun at the wrong angle. Calm, clear, giving them room to correct their aim. "Yes." Surprise registered in the slight widening of her eyes. She hadn't expected that answer, hadn't expected him to be anything other than lost, confused in the wrong building entirely. "Oh, well, account number," Thomas recited it from memory. 9 digits he'd known for 15 years, since the day his father opened the account and said Sun banks are built on trust. Never forget them. The teller typed with deliberate slowness, each keystroke a small act of skepticism, as if the system itself might reject this sawdust-covered intruder. "Daddy, I'm tired." Lily tugged his hand. Thomas looked around for somewhere she could sit. Leather chairs dotted the waiting area, occupied by men in suits that cost more than his truck. One woman saw him looking and pulled her designer handbag closer. A reflexive movement that said, "Not here. Not near us." "Here." He lifted Lily onto his hip. She was getting too big for this 48 pounds that his back registered as a warning, but she was also getting lighter than she should be. The chemo ate muscle and fat with the same indifference it showed cancer cells. He tried not to think about the numbers on her chart, the ones that kept trending down when they should have been climbing up. The teller was frowning at her screen now, scrolling through something with increasing confusion. She picked up the phone, cupping her hand around the receiver, voice dropping to a whisper. Thomas couldn't hear, but could read in the tension of her shoulders. Something about the account wasn't adding up in her world. Something didn't fit the narrative she'd built the moment she saw his boots. Is there a problem? I just need to verify something. One moment. She turned away slightly and Thomas caught fragments irregular verify identity protocol. Words that meant she'd already decided he didn't belong here, was already building a case for why this transaction couldn't happen. Lily shifted in his arms, getting heavier as exhaustion won out over stubborn pride. Her breathing was shallow against his neck, each exhale a reminder of how hard her body was fighting. High heels clicked across marble with the precision of a metronome. Thomas didn't need to look up to know what was coming. He'd heard that sound before, authority announcing itself, power making sure everyone knew it was entering the room. Margaret Sinclair materialized from a corner office like weather you could see building on the horizon. Her suit was immaculate, tailored to broadcast success. Her hair was perfect, not a strand willing to rebel. Her smile was the kind that preceded pain sharp enough to cut and cold enough to freeze the wound. Good afternoon. She positioned herself between Thomas and the counter, a wall of silk and certainty. Her gaze performed the same calculation everyone else's had work boots, sawdust sick child. Problem. Her eyes lingered on Lily for a fraction too long, and Thomas felt his jaw tighten. Don't look at her like that. Don't you dare look at my daughter like she's something broken. I'm Margaret Sinclair, branch manager. How can I assist you today? Just checking my balance. Your teller seemed confused about something. Margaret glanced at the screen, then back at Thomas. The math was happening behind her eyes, visible in the slight narrowing of her pupils. She was adding up everything she saw, and arriving at a sum that didn't balance. Sir, I'm going to be direct with you. Okay. This is a premium banking facility. We serve a very specific clientele, high net worth individuals, business executives, people who... She paused, searching for words that would sting without leaving marks attorneys could point to later. People who meet certain financial thresholds. Lily stirred in Thomas's arms. She was listening. Children always listened, especially when adults thought they weren't paying attention. He could feel her processing this, trying to understand why the woman with the nice smile was saying things that felt mean. I have an account here. Our system shows some irregularities. I'm going to have to ask you to visit our downtown community branch. They're better equipped to handle... Another pause. Another carefully chosen weapon. Your type of situation. Behind Thomas, someone chuckled. Low, quiet, meant to be heard. He didn't turn around, wouldn't give them that. His father had taught him better, never let someone else's cruelty change who you are. Stay steady, stay true. Build something that lasts. What type of situation would that be? Margaret's smile widened predatory now. She was enjoying this. Thomas saw it in the way her shoulders relaxed, the slight upturn at the corner of her mouth. This was power to her, making people feel small, watching them shrink under the weight of her authority. Sir, let's not make this difficult. I can have security assist you to the door, or you can leave with your dignity intact. Your choice. The word dignity landed like a slap. As if he'd forfeited it the moment he walked in wearing clothes that smelled like honest work. As if dignity was something granted by people in expensive suits, not something earned through showing up every day, doing what you promised, treating people with the respect she was systematically denying him. Lily whispered into Thomas's ear, her breath warm and worried. Daddy, why is she being so mean? Margaret heard. Thomas watched her eyebrow arch. Watched her lips part to deliver whatever cutting response she'd prepared. Something inside his chest cracked. Not his heart. Something older. Something forged in the same furnace that had turned his father's hands to leather and his own spine to steel. Stay right here, sweetheart. Right next to Daddy. He set Lily down gently, keeping her hand in his. She nodded, eyes wide, sensing something important was happening, even if she couldn't name it yet. Thomas straightened to his full height, 6'3" of shoulders, built from carrying lumber since he was 16, hands that had constructed hospitals and schools and churches, eyes that had watched his wife die and his daughter fight cancer and still found reasons to believe in human kindness. "Your name is Margaret Sinclair." Not a question, a statement. "That's correct." "How long have you worked here?" She seemed surprised by the question, thrown off balance by his tone, calm, direct, without the anger she'd been expecting. 12 years. Not that it's any of your business." 12 years. And in those 12 years, did anyone ever teach you the history of this bank? Margaret's smile flickered, the first crack in her certainty. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking a direct question. Do you know who built this building?" "I don't see how that's relevant." "Bennett Construction. Summer of 1998. The name meant nothing to her. Thomas could see that clearly. Just another company, just another building, just another thing that existed in her world without her caring how it got there. The marble under her feet might as well have grown from the earth fully formed. The walls could have materialized from nothing. History was whatever she decided mattered, and apparently the men who'd poured concrete in 100-degree heat didn't make the list. "My father's company, Michael Bennett. He poured the foundation, raised these walls, installed the marble you're standing on. That chandelier above your head, he hung it himself because the regular crew was too scared of the height." Margaret's expression shifted, confusion mixing with the first drops of concern, like she'd reached for solid ground and found herself stepping into quicksand. "He worked 18-hour days for 6 months, broke 2 ribs when a beam shifted, finished the job anyway because he gave his word and—" "Sir, I don't know what game you're playing." "No game, just facts. Your bank's founder, Mr. Harrison, used to bring my father lemonade during the summer. Said Michael Bennett was the most honest man he'd ever met. Said this bank was built to serve people exactly like him. Working. People, real people. People who earned their money with their hands instead of inheriting it." Margaret's jaw tightened. The shark was no longer certain it was the predator in this conversation. Around them, the lobby had gone quiet. Other customers were listening now, pretending to check their phones while their ears strained to catch every word. "That's a very touching story, but it doesn't change the fact that my father died 3 years ago. Lung cancer. All that construction dust finally caught up with him." Thomas kept his voice calm, but something underneath it had turned to tempered steel. The kind you forge slow with patience until it's strong enough to bear weight that would crush ordinary metal. "He worked his whole life building things for people who would never know his name. Hospitals where their children would be born, schools where their grandchildren would learn, churches where they'd pray for blessings they didn't deserve." Emma reached up and grabbed her father's hand. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the feeling. She'd seen her father stand like this before, when doctors gave bad news, when bills came that they couldn't pay, when the world tried to crush him and he refused to bend. He never asked for recognition, never wanted his name on a building. He just believed that if you did good work, if you treated people with respect, if you built things that lasted, the world would eventually become a better place. Margaret crossed her arms, defensive posture masking as impatience. "This is all very sentimental, but I have actual clients waiting." Security. 2 guards appeared, large men in dark suits, professional and uncomfortable. They'd heard the conversation. They could feel something in the air their training hadn't prepared them for. Jake Mitchell, the older of the 2, had worked construction before this job. He recognized the Bennett name, remembered stories about the family that had built half the city. "Please escort this gentleman and his daughter to the exit." Thomas didn't move. He looked at Jake, and the guard's hand stopped halfway to Thomas's elbow. Some lines you don't cross, not when you've seen what honest work looks like. Not when there's a sick kid involved. Sir, Jake's voice was quiet, apologetic. Please don't make this difficult. I'm not trying to make anything difficult. I just want to check my balance. My daughter has a heart condition. She had chemotherapy this morning. She's exhausted, and I promised her ice cream after we finished this one simple task. That's all we want, one simple task. The guard hesitated. His eyes moved to Lily, to her pale face, to the teddy bear missing its eye, to the way she leaned against her father's leg like it was the only pillar keeping her standing. Jake Mitchell had a granddaughter about the same age. Healthy, thank God, but he couldn't look at this child without thinking, that could be Emma. That could be my whole world fighting to stay in it. Ma'am, maybe we could just check his balance real quick. It would only take a minute. Margaret's face flushed red. Her authority was being questioned in front of customers, in front of staff, in front of everyone who was supposed to see her as the person who made decisions that mattered. Absolutely not. I will not have this. She stopped herself. Recalculated, found a different weapon. This is a matter of bank security. His identification needs to be verified through proper channels at the downtown branch. My ID is right here. Thomas pulled out his driver's license. The plastic was worn, edges rounded from years in his wallet. Thomas James Bennett. Same name on the account. Same name that had been on the account for 15 years, since the day his father sat him down and explained, son, this bank is built on more than money. It's built on trust. Never forget that. Margaret didn't even look at the license. Downtown branch, final answer. Why? Because I said so. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Because I said so. The oldest power play in human history. The sentence that really meant because I can. Because you can't stop me. Because people like you don't matter in places like this. Thomas looked at Margaret Sinclair for a long moment. He was thinking about his father, about the way Michael Bennett used to handle situations like this. The old man had a saying he'd repeated until it became gospel, son, never let anyone make you smaller than God made you. But also, never become the kind of person who makes others feel small. It's a hard balance to keep. When I was 17, I worked construction with my dad during summers right here in this bank. We'd come in before dawn and leave after dark. One day, a man in an expensive suit walked past me and spit on the floor I'd just swept. Didn't say a word, just spit and kept walking. Margaret shifted her weight. The lobby had gone completely silent now. Even the ambient sounds of the building seemed to have paused, as if the walls themselves were listening. I wanted to hit him. I was 17 and strong and full of that anger you have when you're young and the world hasn't beaten it out of you yet. But my dad put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Let it go, Thomas. That man's punishment is having to live as himself. Don't let him make you into someone you're not." Thomas smiled. A sad smile, the kind that belongs to people who have learned hard lessons and wear the scars to prove it. I've thought about that moment a lot over the years, especially when my wife died, especially when the insurance fought us on every bill, especially when it seemed like the world was determined to crush everything I loved. He looked directly at Margaret, not with anger, with something worse, with pity. I feel sorry for you. Margaret's face flushed deeper. Excuse me? You heard me. I feel sorry for you. Somewhere along the line, someone taught you that power means making other people feel worthless, that success means stepping on the people below you, that your value as a human being comes from the suffering you can inflict. How dare you? My daughter is watching this right now. She's learning what kind of world she lives in, what kind of people exist, what kind of cruelty is possible from people in nice suits with nice offices. Thomas knelt down next to Lily. The marble was cold against his knee, worn smooth by thousands of feet that had walked these halls without ever wondering who laid the stone. Hey, sweetheart, Look at me." Lily turned her tired eyes toward her father, confused and scared, but trusting him the way children trust when nothing else makes sense. "You know what's happening right now? The mean lady wants us to leave." "That's right. And do you know why?" Lily shook her head, curls bouncing against cheeks that should have been pink with health instead of gray with exhaustion. "Because she looked at our clothes and decided we weren't important enough to help. She didn't ask about us, didn't wonder who we were, didn't care about our story. She just saw what was on the outside and made up her mind." "That's not fair." "No, it's not. But here's the thing I want you to remember. What she's doing right now that says everything about who she is, and what we do next that says everything about who we are." Lily's eyes were wet now, but she wasn't crying. She was her mother's daughter. Sarah had taught her that tears were fine, but giving up wasn't an option. "What are we going to do?" Thomas thought about his father, about lemonade in summer heat, about broken ribs and finished jobs, about a man who built half a city and never once let it make him cruel. "We're going to show her that kindness is stronger than meanness, that dignity can't be taken away by people with fancy offices, and that no matter how hard life gets, we don't become the thing we're fighting against." He stood up, still holding Lily's hand. The marble floor had left an imprint on his knee, a temporary mark that would fade. Unlike the permanent foundation his father had poured, the one that would hold this building long after everyone in it was dust. "Mrs. Sinclair, I'm not leaving until I check my balance. You can call the police if you want. You can have me dragged out in front of my 8-year-old daughter who's fighting to stay alive. You can make this the ugliest moment of both our lives. That's your choice." Margaret's nostrils flared. She wasn't used to people who wouldn't bend, who couldn't be bullied or bought or made to disappear with a few sharp words. "You're making a huge mistake." "Maybe. But at least I'll be able to sleep tonight." The standoff stretched. Seconds felt like hours. The lobby held its breath, dozens of people frozen in a moment that would define what kind of institution this really was. Were they the bank that Michael Bennett had helped build, founded on the principle that every customer deserved respect? Or were they something else? Something that valued appearance over humanity? Jake Mitchell's radio crackled. Dispatch asking for a status update. The guard didn't respond. He was watching Thomas Bennett hold his daughter's hand, and in that simple gesture, he saw every value his own father had taught him about what it meant to be a man. You protect the weak. You stand up for what's right. You don't let bullies win just because they have nicer offices. Then a voice cut through the tension like a blade through canvas. "What the hell is going on here?" Everyone turned. An older man stood near the elevator, 72 years old, with silver hair and a suit that cost more than most people's cars. But his eyes weren't looking at clothes or situations or optics. His eyes were locked on Thomas Bennett with recognition that spanned decades, with a memory that could bridge the gap between the boy who'd swept floors and the man who now stood defending his right to exist in a space his family had literally built. Thomas Bennett. Margaret's face went white. Not pale. White. The color of someone watching their entire world collapse in real time. "Is that really you?" Thomas smiled. For the first time since entering the bank, he genuinely smiled. The kind of smile that comes from seeing someone who knows your story, who remembers where you came from, who understands that the measure of a man isn't in his bank account. "Hello, Mr. Harrison. It's been a long time." Robert Harrison III, chairman of the board of First Union Bank, grandson of the founder, walked across the lobby that Thomas's father had built 26 years ago. And in that moment, Margaret Sinclair finally understood that she had made the worst mistake of her entire career. Each footfall echoed. Robert Harrison didn't rush. He moved with the deliberate pace of someone who'd learned that power didn't need to announce itself loudly. His eyes never left Thomas, and there was something in them recognition, mixed with respect, mixed with anger, that someone would dare treat a Bennett this way in this place, in the building that wouldn't exist without men like Michael. My God, James's boy. I'd recognize those shoulders anywhere. Your father had the same build, same stance, like a man who knew exactly where he belonged in the world. Thomas extended his hand. The handshake was firm, two-handed, the kind shared between men who understood that a grip meant something, that your word and your clasp were currencies more valuable than anything printed by the Federal Reserve. Mr. Harrison, I didn't expect to see you here today. Board meeting ran long. I was just leaving when I heard the commotion. Robert gripped Thomas's hand with both of his own, and Margaret watched her authority evaporate like morning dew under a blowtorch. How many years has it been? 3 years since Dad's funeral. You sent flowers, Lily's mom's favorite. Your mother? How is Eleanor? She passed 2 years ago. Couldn't really live without him. They'd been together since high school. Robert's face softened with genuine grief. Not the performative kind that politicians wear at fundraisers, but the real thing. The kind that comes from knowing people, from having shared meals and stories, and the understanding that some bonds matter more than business. I'm so sorry, Thomas. I didn't know. Your parents were good people. The best kind of people. Margaret cleared her throat. The sound was desperate, like a drowning person gasping for air, grasping for any debris that might keep her afloat. Mr. Harrison, sir, I can explain the situation. Robert held up one hand without looking at her. The gesture was small, but it carried absolute authority. Kings used to command armies with less. Margaret's mouth closed immediately, jaw clicking shut like a trap springing in reverse. Thomas, who is this little one? Robert knelt down slowly, his old knees protesting the movement. He didn't seem to care. Lily had pressed herself against her father's leg again, overwhelmed by the tension and the strangers and the exhaustion that never quite left her body anymore. This is my daughter Lily. Lily, this is Mr. Harrison. He was a friend of Grandpa Michael. Robert smiled at her, and it was the kind of smile that reached his eyes and meant it. Not the corporate smile. Not the smile you put on for cameras. The real thing, the one you save for children and old friends and moments that matter. Hello, Lily. You know something. You look just like your grandmother did when she was young. Same eyes. Same brave face. Lily's voice came out small, uncertain, testing the waters of this strange adult world where people were mean for no reason, and then suddenly, nice for no reason. You knew my grandma. I did. She used to bring lunch to your grandfather when he was building this very bank. Every single day, rain or shine. Homemade sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. She'd sit right over there. He pointed to a corner of the lobby, and suddenly the space wasn't just marble and money. It was history. It was Eleanor Bennett, sitting on a folding chair waiting for her husband to take a break, never complaining even when hours stretched into evening. Sometimes that was hours. She never complained, not once. Grandma was nice. The nicest. And your grandfather was the most honest man I ever met. Built half the buildings in this city with his own 2 hands. Never cut a corner. Never broke a promise. Never treated anyone like they were beneath him. Robert stood, his knees crackling loud enough to hear. His eyes finally turned to Margaret, and all the warmth vanished from his face like summer giving way to sudden winter. Margaret. My office. Now. Mr. Harrison, if I could just explain. I didn't ask for an explanation. I gave you an instruction. But sir, this man came in without proper. This man's father built the floor you're standing on. His grandfather taught my grandfather what honest labor looked like. 3 generations of Bennetts have worked with 3 generations of Harrisons. And in all that time, not one of them ever had to beg to be treated like a human being in our bank. Margaret's face had transitioned from white to gray, the color of ash. The color of things that used to be solid before fire turned them to nothing. I didn't know who he was. That's exactly the problem. Robert's voice dropped to something quiet and dangerous, the kind of quiet that precedes explosions. You didn't know, so you decided he didn't matter. You looked at his clothes and made your judgment. You saw his daughter, his sick daughter from what I'm gathering, and you still chose cruelty over basic decency. I was following protocol for suspicious. What protocol? Show me the page in our employee handbook that says humiliate working-class families in front of the entire lobby. Show me the training manual that teaches our managers to mock children fighting cancer. I'll wait. Margaret said nothing. There was nothing to say. The hole she'd dug was deep enough to bury her career, and everyone in the lobby could see the dirt still falling. Robert turned back to Thomas, and the transformation was complete. The anger didn't disappear. It remained banked like coals waiting for oxygen, but it was contained, redirected, focused on making this right instead of making Margaret suffer. Thomas, I am deeply sorry for what happened here today. This is not what this bank stands for. This is not what my grandfather built. And this is certainly not what your father helped create. It's not your fault, Mr. Harrison. Yes, it is. I'm the chairman. Everything that happens under this roof is my responsibility, including the people I've trusted to represent our values. The lobby had become a theater. Every customer, every teller, every security guard was watching. Some had phones out recording. Others simply stared, transfixed by a drama none of them had expected when they walked in for routine transactions. This was the kind of story they'd tell at dinner parties for years. Remember when that branch manager tried to throw out the guy who owned half the bank? Marcus Washington, the young teller who had originally tried to help. Thomas stepped forward hesitantly. His hands were shaking. 23 years old, 8 months into his first real job, and suddenly, he was at the center of something that would either define his career or end it. Mr. Harrison, sir, would it be all right if I help Mr. Bennett check his balance now? Robert looked at the young man. Really looked at him the way you assess whether someone is made of the right material. What's your name, son? Marcus Washington, sir. I've been here 8 months. Marcus? Why didn't you help him before? The question wasn't accusatory. It was an invitation to tell the truth, to lay it all out in the open, where everyone could see what kind of culture had been festering in this building. Marcus swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed like he was choking on something bigger than words. Mrs. Sinclair told me not to. She said there were irregularities in the account, that I should call her immediately if anyone who looked. He trailed off ashamed of where the sentence was heading. If anyone who looked like what Marcus, I don't want to hear you say it. But say it anyway. Everyone in this room needs to hear it. Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. If anyone who looked like they didn't belong came in trying to access high-value accounts. She said it was a security measure. She said we needed to protect the bank from. He couldn't finish. The words stuck in his throat like broken glass. From people like me. Thomas said it, not angry, just stating a fact the way you'd read numbers off a tape measure. Marcus nodded, unable to speak, blinking rapidly against tears that came from somewhere deeper than embarrassment, from shame, from the recognition that he'd been complicit in something ugly, that he'd followed orders instead of conscience, and a sick child had suffered because of it. I'm sorry, sir. I should have helped you anyway. I should have done the right thing instead of the easy thing. Thomas looked at the young man for a long moment. Silence stretched between them, heavy with judgment that never came. How old are you, Marcus? 23. You know what I've learned in 45 years of living. The right thing and the easy thing are almost never the same. The fact that you feel bad about this, that means you're not lost. You still have a conscience. Don't ever let anyone take that from you. Marcus nodded. His throat worked, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Jake Mitchell, standing nearby, put a hand on the young man's shoulder, a gesture that said, "You're okay. We're going to be okay." Robert put his hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Let's get you taken care of. Marcus, please pull up Mr. Bennett's account information. I'll stay right here to make sure there are no more irregularities." "Yes, sir." Margaret stood frozen, unsure whether to stay or go. Her authority evaporated so completely that she seemed to have forgotten how to move. Robert didn't even look at her when he spoke. "Margaret, wait for me on the 10th floor. Don't speak to anyone. Don't touch your computer. Don't do anything except sit in my office and think about what happened here." She walked toward the elevator like a condemned prisoner approaching the gallows. Her heels, which had clicked so confidently an hour ago, now made sounds like apologies. Each step was a countdown to the end of everything she'd built: 12 years of performance reviews, promotions, commendations. All of it about to crumble because she'd looked at a man's clothes instead of his character. Lily tugged Thomas's hand. "Daddy, can I sit down? My legs really hurt." Before Thomas could answer, Robert gestured to the nearest leather chair, the kind Margaret would have moved her purse to prevent a working man from sitting near. "Please, sweetheart, sit anywhere you like. Marcus, get this young lady some water and see if there are any cookies in the break room." "Right away, sir." Thomas lifted Lily and carried her to the chair. She sank into the leather with a small sigh of relief, the teddy bear settling into her lap. Her eyes began to droop. She'd been awake since 5 this morning, and the chemo always left her hollowed out like someone had scooped away everything except the bare minimum needed to keep breathing. "She's exhausted." Thomas spoke quietly, standing beside Robert while Marcus hurried toward the back offices. "Chemo mornings are the hardest. She barely slept last night." Robert stood beside him, watching Lily with an expression that mixed sorrow and admiration. "How long has she been fighting?" 18 months. Started as leukemia. Beat that. Then it came back different kind. They say her heart was weakened by the first round of treatment. Now she needs surgery. Dear God. She's a fighter, though. Gets that from her mother. Thomas's voice caught slightly on the word mother. Sarah would be so proud of her. Sarah. That was your wife's name? Yeah. She died giving birth to Lily. Complications the doctors couldn't stop. I held her hand until the end. She kept saying, "Take care of our baby. Promise me." Those were her last words. Robert was quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when words feel too small for the weight of what's being shared, when anything you say would diminish the enormity of someone else's loss. "And you've been raising Lily alone ever since?" "Just me and her against the world. Some days it feels impossible. But then she smiles, or she laughs at something silly, or she tells me she loves me. And I remember why I keep going." Marcus returned with water and a small bag of cookies. The kind they kept in the break room for staff, nothing fancy, but Lily's eyes lit up when she saw them. Thomas helped her drink some water and convinced her to eat half a cookie. Her eyes kept closing, but she was trying to stay awake, trying to be brave for her father the way she always did. "The account information is ready, sir. Should I read it here or read it?" Robert said it loudly enough for everyone to hear. This wasn't going to be whispered. This was going to be public, witnessed, irrefutable. Marcus looked at the screen. His face changed. The color drained, then returned in a flush of confusion that bordered on disbelief. "Sir, are you sure? Because this seems—" "Read it, Marcus." The young teller took a deep breath. His voice shook slightly like he was announcing lottery numbers but couldn't believe they were real. "The primary checking account for Thomas James Bennett shows a current balance of $2,347,000. The lobby went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that happens when reality shifts underneath people's feet, when everything they thought they knew rearranges itself into a shape they don't recognize. A woman near the back dropped her purse. She didn't even notice. "There's more." Marcus's voice was steadier now, reading numbers that were rewriting the story everyone had told themselves about the man in work boots. "There's a trust fund, the Bennett Construction Legacy Fund. Current value is $47,200,000. Someone gasped. Multiple someones. The math was happening in dozens of minds simultaneously, people recalculating everything they'd assumed, everything they'd judged, everything they'd whispered. And there's an educational scholarship account, the Sarah Bennett Memorial Fund. Current value is $12,800,000. Total silence. Complete. Absolute. The kind of silence that feels like pressure, like the air itself is holding its breath. Thomas stood quietly holding Lily's hand while she dozed in the chair. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look proud. He looked like a man who had never cared about any of those numbers in the first place, who saw them as tools for building something that mattered instead of trophies for displaying. Robert turned to the assembled crowd. His voice carried across the marble floor, reaching every corner of the lobby, ensuring that no one could claim they didn't hear what he was about to say. For those of you who weren't paying attention earlier, let me make something very clear. The man you just watched being humiliated is one of the largest account holders in this bank. His family helped build this institution, and his charitable foundations have sent more than 300 students to college in the last decade. The woman who had whispered pathetic earlier was crying now. Silent tears rolled down her perfectly made-up face, tracking through foundation that cost more than Thomas spent on groceries in a month. But that's not why what happened today was wrong. Robert paused, letting the words sink in, making sure everyone understood that what came next was the point, the lesson. The reason this moment would matter beyond just one man's vindication. It would have been equally wrong if Thomas Bennett had $3 in his account instead of 60 million. Because human dignity is not determined by bank balances. Character is not measured by the clothes you wear, and the worth of a person cannot be calculated on any spreadsheet we possess. He let that hang in the air. Let it settle into the marble and the crystal and the oil paintings of stern-faced founders who'd built this place on principles that had somehow gotten lost along the way. My grandfather founded this bank in 1952. He came from nothing immigrant parents, no education, worked 3 jobs simultaneously for 10 years to save enough to open a single branch. And do you know what his first rule was? The rule he made every employee memorize: no one answered. The lobby waited. Every customer who walks through these doors deserves respect, not because of what they have, but because of who they are. Human beings trying to build better lives for themselves and their families. That's it. That's the only qualification for dignity. Robert walked toward Thomas and extended his hand again. This time, it wasn't a greeting. It was something else. An apology. A promise. A recognition that somewhere along the way the institution had forgotten what the founders knew, that money was just paper and numbers, but respect was the foundation everything else was built on. Thomas, I want to apologize personally for what happened today. Not as the chairman of this bank, but as a man who failed to live up to the legacy our families built together. Thomas shook his hand. You didn't fail, Mr. Harrison. You can't control what's in other people's hearts. You can only control your own response when you see it. You're generous, more generous than I would be in your position. I had a good teacher. My dad used to say that holding on to anger is like carrying a hot coal. The only one who gets burned is the person holding it. Robert smiled sadly. Michael always did have a way with words. He had a way with everything except staying alive long enough to meet his granddaughter. The words hung in the air, heavy with loss. Thomas looked down at Lily, who had finally surrendered to exhaustion and fallen asleep in the leather chair. Her small chest rose and fell in the rhythm of innocent dreams, her hand still clutching the teddy bear that had seen her through more hospital nights than any child should know. "Mr. Harrison, I need to ask you something." "Anything." "The woman who did this, Margaret, what's going to happen to her?" Robert's expression hardened. "She'll be terminated immediately. What she did today wasn't just rude, it was a violation of everything this institution claims to stand for. Can I ask you not to do that?" The words surprised everyone within earshot. Robert actually took a step back as if Thomas had physically pushed him. "I'm sorry. Don't fire her, not yet." "Thomas, she humiliated you in front of your sick daughter, in front of all these people. She tried to have you thrown out of a bank your father helped build. Why on earth would you want to protect her?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. He looked at Lily again, watching her sleep, thinking about all the things he wanted to teach her, before time ran out or she grew up, or both. "When my wife died, I was angry at everyone, at the doctors, at God, at the universe. I wanted someone to blame someone, to punish someone, to pay for taking her from me." Robert listened without interrupting. "But my dad sat me down and said something I'll never forget. He said, 'Thomas, hurt people, hurt people. The woman who hurt you today is probably carrying pain you can't even imagine. That doesn't excuse what she did. But destroying her won't bring Sarah back. The only thing that will help is building something better.'" "That's very noble. I'm not trying to be noble, I'm trying to teach my daughter something. She's going to remember today for the rest of her life. She's going to remember how people treated us. And she's going to remember how I responded." Thomas's voice was steady, certain, built on a foundation that 12 years of loss and struggle had only made stronger. "If I destroy that woman, what lesson does Lily learn? That power is for revenge. That strength means crushing the people who hurt you." He shook his head. "I want her to learn something different. I want her to know that real strength is choosing mercy when you have every right to choose punishment. That the measure of a man isn't what he does when he's powerless, but what he does when he has all the power." The lobby was absolutely still. Even the ambient sounds of the building seemed to have paused, as if the walls themselves were listening to something they'd never heard before in all their years of hosting transactions and meetings and the quiet hum of money changing hands. Robert stared at Thomas for a long moment. "Your father would be proud of you." "I hope so. Some days I'm not sure." "I'm sure. Michael Bennett raised an extraordinary man. He raised a man who's trying his best. That's all any of us can do." Robert took a deep breath, the kind you take when you're about to make a decision that changes the direction of everything that follows. "All right, I won't fire her today, but she can't continue as branch manager. Not after what I witnessed." "That seems fair. Maybe she could work somewhere else, a different branch, start over, learn to be better. You're a more forgiving person than I am, Thomas." "I'm not forgiving her. I'm just choosing not to let her define me. There's a difference." Marcus Washington, still standing at his station, spoke up. His voice was tentative but genuine. "Mr. Bennett, sir, can I ask you something?" Thomas turned to him. "Of course. Why do you have all that money?" "I mean, I'm sorry that came out wrong. I just mean you dress like a regular person. You act like a regular person. Most people with that kind of wealth, they make sure everyone knows it." Thomas smiled. A real smile this time, not sad, not weighted with grief, just honest. "My dad used to say that the loudest person in the room is usually the most insecure. He built his whole life without ever once trying to impress anyone. He just did good work, treated people with respect, and let the results speak for themselves." "But $60 million, that money isn't really mine. The construction fund was created by the union after my dad died. Every contractor in the state contributes. It pays for medical bills when workers get hurt, funeral costs when they don't make it home, college tuition for their kids. I'm just the caretaker." He paused, thinking about Sarah, about the classroom where she'd spent 15 years teaching children that society had already written off. And the scholarship fund, that one's for my wife. Sarah was a teacher. She worked in underfunded schools her whole career. After she died, I put everything we had into a fund that would help kids like the ones she taught. Kids who deserved a chance but couldn't afford one. Robert's eyes had gone wet. He didn't bother hiding it. Thomas, I had no idea. Why would you? I don't do it for recognition. I do it because it's what Sarah would have wanted. What my dad would have wanted. What I want Lily to understand when she's old enough to inherit the responsibility. Inherit? When I'm gone, all of this goes to her. Not to spend on herself. To continue the work. To keep building. To keep helping. To keep honoring the people who came before us. Lily stirred in her chair. Her eyes fluttered open, confused and heavy with sleep. Daddy, I'm right here, sweetheart. Can we go get ice cream now? Thomas laughed, a warm, genuine laugh that seemed to break the tension in the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. Yeah, baby, we can go get ice cream now. I think we're all done here. He bent down to pick her up, but Robert stopped him. Thomas, wait. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Okay. This bank has lost its way. I can see that now. What happened today isn't an isolated incident. It's a symptom of something deeper. Something broken. Thomas waited. I'm asking if you would consider joining our board of directors. Not because of your money, but because we need someone who understands what this institution was supposed to be. Someone who can remind us why my grandfather founded it in the first place. Thomas looked at Lily, then back at Robert. I'm a construction worker, Mr. Harrison. I build things with my hands, not with spreadsheets. That's exactly why we need you. We have plenty of people who understand spreadsheets. What we don't have is someone who understands foundations. The word hung in the air, carrying meanings that went far beyond architecture. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Weighing, considering the man his father had raised him to be against the man the world kept trying to turn him into. Can I think about it? Take all the time you need. Thomas nodded. He lifted Lily, carefully settling her against his shoulder. She wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his flannel shirt, the one that smelled like sawdust and home. Mr. Harrison. Yes. Thank you for what you did today. For stopping when you heard the shouting. A lot of people in your position would have just kept walking. Robert's voice was rough with emotion. I almost did, and I would have regretted it for the rest of my life. Thomas started toward the door, then stopped and turned back to Marcus. Hey, Marcus. Yes, sir. You said you've been here 8 months. Yes, sir. Keep being the kind of person who feels bad when they do the wrong thing. That's rarer than you think. Marcus nodded, unable to speak, his throat working against tears that came from somewhere deeper than shame. From hope, maybe. From the understanding that mistakes didn't have to be permanent, that there was still time to become the person he wanted to be. Thomas walked toward the revolving door, carrying his sleeping daughter, leaving behind a lobby full of people who would never forget what they'd witnessed. Behind him, Robert Harrison pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Cancel my afternoon meetings. All of them. Someone on the other end started to protest about schedules and commitments. I don't care about the schedule. Today I watched a man with $60 million get treated like a criminal because he was wearing work clothes. Today I watched a branch manager try to throw out a child with cancer because her father looked poor. Today I learned that we've been building something very different from what my grandfather intended. He paused. And today I'm going to start tearing it down so we can build something better. The revolving door pushed Thomas and Lily out into afternoon sunlight. The city waited for them, buildings that needed constructing, children who needed teaching, people who needed reminding that their worth wasn't measured in bank accounts. Thomas Bennett, construction worker, widower, father, walked down the steps carrying his daughter toward ice cream and home and all the ordinary miracles that make a life worth living. Behind them in the marble lobby, the silence finally broke. People began moving again, talking in hushed voices, processing what they'd seen. Marcus Washington sat at his station and made a decision about the kind of banker he wanted to be. Jake Mitchell returned to his post and thought about the difference between following orders and doing what's right. And somewhere on the 10th floor, Margaret Sinclair sat alone in an empty office, watching her entire world collapse and wondering if there was any way to build something new from the ruins. The elevator doors opened on the 10th floor with a soft chime that sounded like a funeral bell to Margaret Sinclair. 47 minutes. That's how long she'd been sitting in Robert Harrison's office, staring at mahogany walls that seemed to close in with each passing second. 47 minutes of replaying every word, every sneer, every cruel syllable that had come out of her mouth in that lobby. 47 minutes of watching her entire career crumble like a sandcastle meeting the tide. Her father's face kept appearing in her mind. Joseph Sinclair dead at 42 when a scaffold gave way on a construction site in Newark. She'd been 16, standing in a hospital waiting room while doctors explained that hard hats only protect against so much. They'd let her see him one last time still in his work clothes because there hadn't been time to change. Concrete dust in his hair. Calloused hands that would never ruffle her hair again. She'd looked at him lying there and made a promise to herself, never again. Never poor. Never powerless. Never the daughter of a man in dirty clothes. 26 years later, she'd become the thing she'd once hated. Someone who looked at workers in concrete dust and saw less than human. The door opened. Margaret stood reflexively, muscle memory from 12 years of corporate conditioning. Robert Harrison entered without the fury she'd expected. He was calm, controlled. Somehow that was worse. "Do you know what's in this folder, Margaret?" She shook her head. Her voice had abandoned her somewhere between the lobby and the elevator, lost among the wreckage of everything she'd thought she was. Robert placed the folder on his desk with deliberate care, like a prosecutor laying out evidence. "Your personnel file. 12 years of performance reviews, promotions, commendations, awards for exceeding quarterly targets, letters of recommendation from 3 different regional directors." He opened it, spreading documents across mahogany like cards in a game where she'd already lost. "On paper, you're one of the best managers we've ever had. Efficient, profitable, results-oriented." Margaret wanted to feel relief. Couldn't. There was a but coming. She could hear it building in the silence between his words. "But do you know what's not in this file? Not one mention of how you treat people. Not one word about the complaints from junior staff that HR filed and forgot. Not one note about the customers who closed their accounts after interactions with you." "Mr. Harrison, I'm not finished." His hand came up, not aggressive, just final. Margaret's mouth closed. She'd never felt this powerless in 12 years. Not when she'd fought for promotions. Not when she'd battled regional directors over policy. This was different. This was accountability without escape hatches. "I did some research while you were sitting here, made some calls, talked to people who work under you." He pulled out his phone, scrolled through notes with the precision of a man who'd spent decades reading financial reports and learning to spot what numbers couldn't hide. "Do you want to know what I learned?" Margaret didn't answer. The answer didn't matter. He was going to tell her anyway. "I learned that you have a nickname among the tellers. They call you the gatekeeper. Do you know why? Silence. Because you've built an entire system designed to keep certain people out. People who don't dress right, don't speak right, don't look like they belong in a premium banking facility." Robert's voice carried disgust like a weight he was setting down between them. "You've been running a screening operation based on nothing but prejudice, and somehow in 12 years, no one thought to stop you." "I was protecting the bank's interests." The words came out defensive, automatic. The shield she'd been hiding behind for so long, she'd forgotten it was transparent. You were protecting your own ego. There's a difference. Margaret's hands were shaking. She clasped them together, trying to hide the trembling, but it spread up her arms anyway. Control was slipping away like water through fingers. Thomas Bennett, the man you tried to throw out today. Do you have any idea who he is? I know now. No, you don't. You know his account balance. That's not the same as knowing who someone is. Robert leaned forward, and for the first time since entering, his voice carried something beyond professional disappointment. It carried personal offense. Thomas Bennett has donated more money to charitable causes in the last decade than you will earn in your entire lifetime. He's put 347 students through college. He's paid medical bills for over 200 families who would have gone bankrupt without help. He volunteers at a homeless shelter every Thanksgiving. He reads to kids at the Children's Hospital every Saturday morning. Each fact landed like a blow. Margaret felt her certainty cracking the foundation she'd built her identity on, revealing itself as sand. And he's done all of this while raising a daughter alone, while burying his wife, while burying both his parents, while watching his child fight cancer. Margaret's eyes were wet. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears that had no right to fall. Crying now would be performance manipulation, the easy way out. She didn't deserve easy. That man you mocked, that man you called suspicious, that man you wanted dragged out by security, he's more of a human being than anyone I've met in 30 years of banking, including myself. I made a mistake. You made a choice. Robert's correction was surgical, precise, cutting away the excuse and exposing the bone beneath. Mistakes are accidents. What you did was deliberate. You looked at another person and decided they were less than you. You used your power to humiliate someone in front of their sick child. That's not a mistake, Margaret. That's a character revelation. The tears came. Margaret couldn't stop them anymore. They fell hot and ashamed, tracking through makeup she'd applied that morning, when the world still made sense, when she'd still been someone who mattered. I didn't mean to. Yes, you did. You meant every word. You enjoyed it. I saw your face when you were telling him to leave. You were smiling, Margaret. You were having fun. The accusation hit like a physical blow because it was true. For one brief, ugly moment, she had felt powerful, superior, righteous, and now that moment was going to cost her everything. Mr. Harrison, please. I've worked here for 12 years. This job is my life. I don't have anything else. That's exactly the problem. You've spent 12 years building a career on a foundation of contempt, and now that foundation is collapsing. Robert stood and walked to the window. The city stretched out below buildings that Michael Bennett and men like him had constructed with their hands, their sweat, their integrity. Structures that would outlast everyone, currently breathing monuments to the idea that work mattered, that skill mattered, that showing up every day and doing what you promised was worth something. I should fire you. Margaret held her breath. The room contracted to just those 4 words, everything else falling away into white noise. Thomas Bennett asked me not to. The words made no sense. Margaret's mind couldn't process them. She tried to speak. Failed, tried again. What? The man you humiliated, the man you tried to throw out, the man whose daughter you mocked. He asked me to give you a second chance. Why would he do that? The question came out broken, confused, unable to reconcile the world as she understood it with this impossible mercy. Because he's a better person than either of us. Because he understands something we've forgotten. Because he's trying to teach his daughter that mercy is stronger than revenge. Robert turned back from the window, and his face carried something Margaret had never seen there before. Uncertainty mixed with hope, the expression of someone who'd glimpsed a different way of being, and wasn't sure if he could reach it. I'm not going to fire you today, Margaret. Not because you deserve to keep your job, you don't, but because Thomas Bennett reminded me that people can change, that the measure of a person isn't their worst moment, but what they do after it. The mercy felt worse than punishment somehow, heavier, like a debt she could never repay, a weight she'd carry for the rest of her life. You're going to be transferred to the downtown community branch, the one you told Thomas Bennett to visit. Margaret's stomach dropped. You're going to start over as a junior account manager. No corner office, no private parking, no authority over anyone but yourself. For how long? For as long as it takes, maybe forever, maybe until you prove that you're capable of treating every customer with dignity, regardless of what they're wearing or how much money they have. And if I refuse, then you can clean out your desk right now and I'll make sure every bank in this city knows exactly why you were terminated. Margaret understood. It wasn't really a choice. It was a sentence disguised as mercy punishment wrapped in the appearance of compassion. But it was also something else, a chance. A real, genuine opportunity to become someone different, someone better, someone her father wouldn't be ashamed to claim. There's one more thing. Robert's voice carried finality, the tone of someone delivering the last requirement before the deal was sealed. Before you transfer, you're going back to that lobby and you're going to apologize to every single person who witnessed what happened today. They'll never forgive me. Maybe not. But forgiveness isn't the point. Accountability is the point. Acknowledgement is the point. Looking someone in the eye and saying, "I was wrong," is the point. Robert walked to the door and opened it. The gesture was clear conversation over time to face consequences. Take a few minutes to compose yourself. Then go downstairs and start the only thing that might actually save you. What's that? The truth. Margaret sat alone in the empty office for a long time. The city lights were coming on outside, pinpricks of illumination in gathering dusk. Somewhere down there, a man in a flannel shirt was buying ice cream for his daughter, refusing to let the cruelty of strangers poison a promise he'd made. Somewhere down there, people were going home to families, to lives that mattered, for reasons that had nothing to do with bank accounts or job titles. She thought about her own father, about Joseph Sinclair working 2 jobs so his daughter could go to college, wearing out his body so she could have opportunities he'd never had. He'd died believing she was kind, believing she'd use her education to help people, not to hurt them. What would he think if he could see her now? The question burned worse than any termination notice ever could. When Margaret finally stood and walked toward the elevator, she wasn't sure if she was walking toward redemption or just the beginning of a very long penance. But she was walking. Sometimes that was all you could do. The lobby was different when she returned. Quieter. Emptier. Most of the customers had left, but the staff remained going through closing procedures while stealing glances at the woman who had fallen from grace so publicly. Their eyes held no malice, just wariness, the look you give someone who's shown you what they're capable of and might do it again. Marcus was still at his station. He looked up when Margaret approached and something in his young face shifted. Not hatred. Something worse, disappointment. The judgment of someone who'd expected better and gotten proof they shouldn't have. Marcus. Mrs. Sinclair. His voice was professional, distant. The warmth that had been there 8 months ago when she'd hired him fresh out of community college had evaporated completely. I owe you an apology. He waited. Didn't make it easy. Good. She didn't deserve easy. I put you in an impossible position today. I told you to follow policies that never should have existed. I made you complicit in something ugly. Margaret's voice caught, but she pushed through. This wasn't about her comfort. This was about the debt she owed to everyone she'd damaged. And when you tried to do the right thing, I shut you down. I used my authority to silence your conscience. I'm sorry, truly sorry. Not because I got caught, Not because Mr. Harrison made me come down here, but because I was wrong and you deserved better leadership than what I gave you." Marcus was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved past her, seeing something she couldn't. Maybe the future. Maybe just the memory of Thomas Bennett teaching him that feeling bad about doing wrong was worth something. "Mrs. Sinclair, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "When Mr. Bennett talked to me after everything happened, he said something I'm not going to forget." Margaret braced herself, expecting condemnation judgment, the kind of wisdom that would make her crimes look even worse by contrast. He said being the kind of person who feels bad when they do the wrong thing is rarer than I think. The words hit differently than she'd expected. Not as absolution, as observation, as recognition that shame might be the first step towards something better, that the fact she felt this crushing weight meant she wasn't entirely lost. "I think he was right. And I think maybe you're feeling bad right now. Really bad. And maybe that means something. Maybe that means you're not as lost as you thought." Margaret's eyes filled again. She'd expected anger. She'd expected contempt. She hadn't expected grace from a 23-year-old teller she'd spent months overlooking, treating as furniture that processed transactions instead of a person trying to build a life. "Thank you, Marcus." "Don't thank me yet. You've got a lot of apologizing left to do." He was right. The other staff members were watching, waiting, some with arms crossed, some with expressions carefully neutral, all of them wondering if this was genuine remorse or just performance damage control from someone who'd been caught and was trying to minimize consequences. Margaret spent the next hour moving from person to person. Each conversation stripped away another layer of the armor she'd built around herself. Tellers she'd criticized publicly. Security guards she'd ordered to do her dirty work. Junior managers she'd blocked from promotions because their success threatened her sense of superiority. Janet waited until last. Margaret's former assistant stood near the front windows, arms crossed, face unreadable. They'd worked together for 3 years. Janet had tried to warn her, had suggested checking Thomas's account before making assumptions. Margaret had silenced her with a look. "Janet." "Mrs. Sinclair." The formality stung. They'd been on first-name basis once, back when Margaret still pretended to care about the people who worked for her. "I know this doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know something." Margaret forced herself to maintain eye contact, to not look away from the judgment she'd earned. "When I recommended you for that promotion last year and you didn't get it, I'm the one who blocked it. I told the regional director you weren't ready." Janet's face tightened, not with surprise, with confirmation. "I know." The 2 words landed like stones. "You knew." "People talk, Mrs. Sinclair, especially people who get stepped on. We share notes." Margaret closed her eyes. The depth of her betrayals was becoming clearer with every conversation. Every truth that had been living in whispers while she'd walked around blind to the damage she was causing. "I was wrong. You were more than ready. You're probably better qualified than I ever was. And I held you back because—" She couldn't finish. The reason was too ugly, too revealing of the person she'd become. "Because I wasn't the right kind of person." Janet finished, for her voice flat, stating facts without malice. "Because I didn't come from the right background. Because my success would have threatened your version of how the world should work." Yes. The admission cost something. Margaret felt it leaving her the last pretense that she'd been anything other than exactly what Thomas Bennett had seen someone who used power to make others feel small. "Thank you for admitting that. I'll talk to Mr. Harrison. I'll make sure he knows you deserve consideration for branch manager here. This branch. My position." Janet shook her head slowly. "I don't want your position. Not like this. If I ever become branch manager, it's going to be because I earned it, not because you felt guilty and gave it to me." "That's fair. But I appreciate the apology. I really do." Janet's expression softened slightly. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement that the attempt mattered, even if it couldn't erase the harm. And I hope wherever you end up, you remember this day. Remember what it felt like to be humbled. Let it change you. Margaret nodded. There was nothing else to say. She walked toward the exit, past the marble floor. Thomas Bennett's father had laid past the chandelier Michael Bennett had hung with his own hands, past the place where she'd stood just hours ago, convinced of her own superiority and the righteousness of her cruelty. At the door, she turned back one last time. The staff was already moving on, returning to their routines, processing the day's events in their own ways. But she noticed something different, a shift in the air. People were talking to each other more openly, making eye contact, treating each other like human beings instead of job functions. Maybe something had been broken today, but maybe something had also been opened. A door, a possibility, a chance for the institution to remember what it was supposed to be. Margaret Chen walked out into the evening, a woman who had lost everything she thought mattered and was just beginning to discover what actually did. Robert Harrison was making phone calls. Board members, regional directors, legal, HR. The machinery of institutional change was grinding into motion, slow and heavy, but inexorable once it started moving. I want a full audit of every branch's customer interaction policies. His voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent 40 years in banking and had finally decided to use that power for something beyond quarterly earnings reports. Every complaint filed in the last 5 years. Every account closure with service issues listed as the reason. Everything. Someone on the other end protested about cost time disruption. Robert cut them off. I don't care about disruption. What happened today disrupted everything I thought I knew about this organization. We're going to fix it, or we're going to fail trying. He hung up and dialed another number. This one was personal, not institutional. A favor being called in from someone who owed him more than money. Harrison here. I need you to find everything you can about a woman named Sarah Bennett. She was a teacher. Died about 8 years ago. Her husband created a scholarship fund in her name. He listened to the question on the other end, then answered with the patience of someone who knew exactly what he was doing and why. Because I'm going to stand in front of our board next week and explain why we need to match it dollar for dollar, and I want them to understand exactly what kind of legacy we're joining. Another pause. Another question. Yes, I'm serious. For the first time in years, I'm completely serious about something that actually matters. Robert hung up and looked out the window again. Somewhere in this city, a man was keeping a promise to a little girl. Ice cream after a hard day. Simple sweetness, to wash away the bitter taste of cruelty. And somewhere else, a woman was walking home alone, facing the wreckage of who she had become, wondering if it was possible to build something better from the ruins. He thought about his grandfather, about a man who came to this country with nothing and built something that lasted, about a rule carved into the foundation of everything they'd created. Every customer who walks through these doors deserves respect. It was time to remember what that meant. Robert picked up the phone one more time. Get me Thomas Bennett's number. I have an offer to discuss with him, and this time I'm not going to take no for an answer. Thomas Bennett's phone rang at 7:30 that evening. He was sitting on the edge of Lily's bed, watching her sleep, still wearing the flannel shirt that had caused so much trouble earlier. The ice cream trip had been everything he'd promised. Chocolate with rainbow sprinkles. Lily had eaten half before falling asleep in the booth, her face sticky with sweetness. Her teddy bear tucked under her arm like a shield against the world. He looked at the caller ID. Unknown number. Hello? Thomas. It's Robert Harrison. Mr. Harrison, is everything all right? Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. I've been making calls all evening, setting things in motion. I wanted to update you. Thomas gently pulled Lily's blanket higher and stepped into the hallway, pulling the door almost closed, but leaving it open enough to hear if she needed him. She always needed him at 3 in the morning, when nightmares about hospitals mixed with memories of a mother she'd never really known. "I'm listening." Margaret Sinclair accepted the transfer. She spent an hour apologizing to every staff member in the lobby. "I'm told it was genuine. Whether it leads to real change, only time will tell." "That's good. People deserve second chances." "You really believe that?" "Don't you? It's not just something you say." Thomas leaned against the wall, exhaustion settling into bones that had been carrying weight for 8 years without rest. The kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix because it went deeper than muscles all the way down to the foundation of who you were. "My wife used to tell me that grace isn't something we earn. It's something we give because we've received it." His voice caught slightly on the word wife, the way it still did after 8 years, the way it probably always would. "Every time I look at Lily, I remember that I don't deserve her. I don't deserve the time I have with her, but I got it anyway. How can I hold back from someone else what was given so freely to me?" Robert was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rougher than before, worn down by something that might have been emotion, or might have been the recognition of how far he'd drifted from the principles his grandfather had died believing in. "I'm 67 years old, Thomas. I've spent 40 years in banking. I've made decisions that affected thousands of people's lives. And in all that time, I don't think I've ever met anyone quite like you." "I'm nothing special, Mr. Harrison. Just a man trying not to mess up his daughter." "That's exactly what makes you special. You actually believe that." Robert's laugh was soft, almost sad. "What else did you call to tell me? I want you on our board of directors. I mentioned it earlier, but I need you to understand that I'm serious. This isn't charity. It's not gratitude. It's necessity." Thomas thought about the word necessity. Thought about how it felt in his mouth, in his chest, in the part of him that still carried his father's voice saying, "Son, when someone needs help, you help. No calculations, no conditions. You just help. I told you I'd think about it. I know, and I'm asking you to think faster, because tomorrow morning I'm presenting a proposal to restructure our entire community engagement approach. I want to create a program modeled after your scholarship fund, matching donations, educational support, medical assistance for families in crisis, and I want you to help lead it." Thomas closed his eyes. He thought about his father, who had spent his whole life building things for other people. He thought about Sarah, who had believed so fiercely in the potential of every child she taught. He thought about Lily, who might not have much time left, and what she would want him to do with whatever time he had. "Mr. Harrison, can I be honest with you, please? I'm tired. I've been tired for 8 years. Since Sarah died, I've been running on fumes and prayers and the stubborn refusal to let my daughter down." The confession felt like breaking bones that had healed wrong, setting them again so they could mend properly. Painful, but necessary. "The money I have, the foundations, the scholarships, they're not mine. They're Sarah's legacy, my father's legacy. I'm just the caretaker. That's exactly why we need you." Robert's response came quick, certain, like he'd been waiting for this objection and had the answer ready. "Because you understand that none of it belongs to you. Most people with your resources spend their lives accumulating more, protecting what they have, building walls around their wealth. You've spent your life giving it away. That perspective is invaluable. I don't know anything about banking. You know everything about people. That's more important." Thomas opened his eyes and looked through the doorway at Lily's sleeping form. Her chest rose and fell in that fragile rhythm he'd learned to watch like a hawk, the rhythm that told him she was still here, still fighting, still his. "Lily's surgery is in 3 weeks. "I know." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Thomas's jaw tightened. "How do you know? I didn't pull medical records that would violate HIPAA. You mentioned St. Mary's Children's Hospital, Dr. Catherine Webb. I made some calls. She's one of the best pediatric cardiac surgeons in the country." Thomas relaxed slightly. At least Robert hadn't crossed that line. There were still some boundaries the powerful respected, even if only because lawyers made them. "The leukemia is in remission now, but the chemotherapy damaged her heart. Anthracycline-based treatment, it's toxic to cardiac muscle. She has mitral valve regurgitation. They need to repair it before it causes permanent damage." The medical terminology came out practiced, rehearsed from dozens of conversations with doctors who spoke in abbreviations and percentages, reducing his daughter's life to statistics and survival rates. "Thomas, I'm not asking you to start tomorrow. I'm not asking you to abandon your daughter. I'm asking you to consider when Lily is recovered, when things are more stable, whether you might be willing to help us build something meaningful. And if she doesn't recover—" The words came out before Thomas could stop them. The fear he carried every moment of every day, the nightmare that waited in the dark corners of 3 a.m, when Lily's breathing sounded too shallow and the machines in his memory wouldn't stop beeping. "Then I will personally ensure that her legacy continues. The Sarah Bennett Memorial Fund, the construction scholarship, everything your family has built. I will protect it as if it were my own. You have my word." Thomas felt something shift in his chest, not pain, something older. Something that had been holding together for 8 years through sheer force of will, through the determination that giving up wasn't an option, because Lily needed him, and Sarah's memory deserved better, and his father had taught him that Bennett men finished what they started. "Why would you do that?" His voice came out rough, scraped raw by emotion he hadn't let himself feel in front of anyone, not even Lily, because fathers were supposed to be strong and certain, and she had enough fear without taking on his. "Because I watched you today, Thomas. I watched you choose dignity over destruction. I watched you extend grace to someone who had shown you contempt. And I realized that I've been so focused on building wealth that I forgot to build character." Robert paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone confronting their own failures and finding them heavier than expected. "You reminded me of something I should never have forgotten, that the measure of a man isn't what he accumulates, it's what he leaves behind." Thomas wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. The hallway was dark except for the light spilling from Lily's room, and he was grateful for that darkness. Grateful that no one could see him breaking apart in the space between who he'd been and who he was trying to become. My dad used to say something similar. He'd come home covered in concrete dust, and my mom would ask him what he built that day. And he'd say, "I built someone's dream, Eleanor. And that's worth more than any paycheck." Your father sounds like a remarkable man. He was. He really was. Will you think about my offer? Thomas thought about Lily sleeping in the next room, about the surgery scheduled for 3 weeks from now, about the doctor who would hold his daughter's heart in her hands and decide whether it could be fixed or whether they'd all just been hoping for something that was never going to happen. He thought about what Lily would want, what Sarah would want, what his father would want. I already have. Robert paused. You have. The answer is yes. Silence on the other end. Then, yes. Yes, not for the title, not for the position, but because Lily needs to see that her father didn't just survive, he built. And if I'm going to teach her that lesson, I need to live it. Thank you, Thomas. You won't regret this. I know, because I'm not doing it for me. They talked for another few minutes, working out preliminary details, meeting times, expectations, the scope of the commitment. But underneath the logistics, something else was being constructed. A foundation for something neither of them could fully see yet, built on the principle that people mattered more than profit, and that the true measure of an institution wasn't its quarterly earnings, but whether it made the world better or just made a few people richer. When Thomas finally hung up, he returned to Lily's bedside and sat in the chair he'd occupied through countless sleepless nights. The chair that knew the shape of his spine, the weight of his fear, the depth of his love for the small person breathing softly under cartoon blankets. "Hey, sweetheart," he whispered, even though she was asleep, even though she couldn't hear him. "I think I did something good today. I'm not sure yet, but I think your grandpa would be proud. And I think your mom would be too." Lily stirred slightly in her sleep, her small hand reaching out. Thomas took it, feeling her tiny fingers curl around his. They were warmer than they'd been this morning. That was good. Warm was good. Warm meant blood was flowing, heart was pumping. Body was fighting. "We're going to be okay. Whatever happens, we're going to be okay. Because we have each other, and because we know how to love people even when they forget how to love themselves." He stayed there all night, holding her hand, watching her breathe, waiting for morning, and the 3 weeks that stood between this moment and the surgery that would either save her or break him completely. 3 weeks later, Thomas sat in a hospital waiting room while strangers in scrubs decided whether his daughter would live or die. The surgery was supposed to take 4 hours. They were now in hour 6, and nobody had come out to tell him anything. No news could be good news, or it could be the worst news wrapped in silence. Robert Harrison sat beside him. Thomas had protested when the chairman insisted on coming, had said he didn't need company, that Robert had better things to do than watch a man fall apart in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights that made everything look sickly. "You shouldn't be alone right now. No one should be alone at times like this." So, Robert had come. And Marcus had shown up in hour 5 carrying coffee that neither of them drank, and sandwiches that neither of them touched. And Janet had arrived during hour 6, walking in without a word, sitting down on Thomas's other side, putting her hand on his arm with the kind of quiet solidarity that meant more than any speech about thoughts and prayers. "How did you know?" Thomas managed to form the words, his voice coming from somewhere distant, disconnected from the body that was sitting in this chair, while his heart was somewhere behind those double doors in an operating room he couldn't see. "Marcus called me. He said you might need people around you. I barely know any of you." "That's not how community works, Mr. Bennett. Sometimes strangers become family when you're not looking." Thomas tried to respond. His throat wouldn't cooperate. He just nodded, blinking rapidly against tears that had been threatening all day. Moisture that couldn't fall, because if he started crying, he might never stop. And Lily needed him strong when she woke up. If she woke up, she had to wake up. Hour 7 crawled past. Thomas sat motionless, gripping the armrests of his chair hard enough to leave impressions. His knuckles were white. His jaw ached from clenching. Everything in him was focused on those doors, watching for movement, for any sign that someone was coming to tell him something. Anything. Even bad news would be better than this silence that stretched on and on. He thought about Sarah. About the last time he'd sat in a hospital waiting room 9 years ago while doctors tried to stop bleeding they couldn't control, and his wife died bringing his daughter into the world. About how he'd made a promise to Sarah's hand as it went cold. "I'll take care of her. I swear. I'll take care of our baby." And now here he was, waiting to find out if he'd kept that promise or failed the only person who'd ever truly mattered. A nurse emerged from the surgical wing. Thomas stood so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. Robert's hand steadied him, catching his elbow before he stumbled. "Mr. Bennett." "Yes. Is she okay? Is Lily okay?" The nurse smiled. A real smile. The kind that carries relief instead of practiced sympathy. "Dr. Webb will be out in a few minutes to explain everything, but I wanted to let you know the surgery was successful. Lily did wonderfully. She's a fighter." Thomas's knees unlocked. The floor tilted. Robert's hands were the only thing keeping him upright, steadying him while the world reorganized itself around this impossible good news, this miracle he'd been afraid to hope for. "She's okay. She's going to need recovery time, months of monitoring, but the repair was successful. Her heart is whole again." The nurse's words kept coming, something about barring complications and full normal life and running, playing, growing up. But Thomas couldn't hear them anymore. His ears were ringing. His vision was blurring. 8 years of holding himself together. 8 years of being strong enough for both of them. 8 years of not breaking because Lily needed him solid. All of it came crashing down in one moment. He didn't cry. That would come later. Right now he just breathed. Deep, shuddering breaths like someone who'd been underwater too long and finally found air. His whole body shook with it, with the relief that was too big for tears, too overwhelming for any single emotion to contain. Robert held him upright. Janet rubbed his back. Marcus stood awkwardly nearby, tears streaming down his own face because sometimes you cry for other people's joy when your own life has been too small to hold anything that matters this much. Dr. Webb emerged 15 minutes later. She found a waiting room that had transformed from a place of fear into a place of joy. 3 people surrounding one man who couldn't stop smiling through the tears that had finally started falling. "Mr. Bennett, your daughter is extraordinary. Her resilience during the procedure was remarkable. We were able to repair the valve damage completely. Barring complications, she should be able to live a full, normal life." "A normal life?" Thomas repeated the words like a prayer, like a benediction, like the answer to a question he'd been asking God for 18 months without believing he'd ever get a response. Running, playing, growing up, all of it. He couldn't speak. He just shook the doctor's hand over and over, gripping it with both of his. Like letting go would make the news less real, like if he held on long enough it would sink in that his daughter was going to live. "Can I see her?" "She's still in recovery. Give us about an hour and I'll have someone bring you back." The longest hour of Thomas's life. He spent it pacing, sitting, standing, looking at his phone without seeing it, accepting congratulations from people he barely knew and would never forget. Robert's text came through board-approved Bennett Community Initiative. "You're officially one of us now. Take all the time you need with Lily. The work will be waiting when you're ready." Thomas typed back with one hand, not wanting to let go of the solid reality of the chair arm, the physical proof that he was here, that this was real, that everything was going to be different now. "Thank you for everything." Robert's response came immediately. "Don't thank me. Thank your father for raising the kind of man who makes the rest of us want to be better." Finally, a nurse appeared. "Mr. Bennett, Lily's asking for her daddy." He followed her through corridors that smelled like antiseptic and hope, through doors marked with warnings and promises, into a room where monitors beeped and machines hummed, and a small girl with tired eyes and a bright smile was propped up on pillows waiting for him. "Daddy." Her voice was weak, but it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. More beautiful than wedding vows. More beautiful than "I love you" whispered in the dark. More beautiful than anything that had ever existed in the history of sound. "Hey, sweetheart, I'm here." "Daddy's here." He rushed to her bedside and took her hand, careful not to disturb the tubes and wires that were keeping her safe, keeping her monitored, keeping her alive. "Did they fix my heart?" "They did, baby. They fixed it good." "Does that mean I can get ice cream again?" Thomas laughed through his tears, the kind of laugh that comes from a place beyond exhaustion, beyond grief, beyond fear, the kind that means everything is going to be okay. All the ice cream you want, every flavor, every topping, for the rest of your life. Even for breakfast. Let's not go crazy, Lily giggled. A small sound, a precious sound, a sound that meant the world was still spinning and his daughter was still in it, and nothing else mattered more than that. Daddy. Yes, sweetheart. I had a dream while they were fixing me. Thomas's heart, which had just started to slow down, kicked back into overdrive. What kind of dream? Mommy was there. The words hit him like a physical force. He sat down hard in the chair beside her bed, still holding her hand, not trusting his legs to keep supporting him through whatever was coming next. She was holding my hand, telling me it would be okay. She said she's always watching. She said she's proud of us. Thomas's throat closed. He couldn't speak. He just leaned down and kissed Lily's forehead, letting his tears fall on her skin, letting her feel how much he loved her, how grateful he was, how completely terrified he'd been of losing her. She also said to tell you to eat more vegetables. Despite everything, Thomas laughed. Really laughed. The kind of laugh that Sarah used to pull out of him when the world got too heavy and he forgot that joy was still possible. That sounds like your mom. I miss her. I miss her too. Every day. Lily's eyes were closing again, exhaustion from the surgery pulling her under. But before she went, she squeezed his hand one more time. Daddy, I'm really tired. Can you stay while I sleep? I'm not going anywhere. I'll be right here when you wake up. Promise. Promise. Within minutes, she was asleep. Her hand wrapped around his finger the way it had been since the day she was born 8 years ago, when Sarah's last gift to him had been this perfect, impossible person who somehow carried the best parts of both of them. Thomas sat in the chair beside her bed and watched her breathe. Not the shallow, labored breathing of a sick child. The deep, easy breathing of a child who was healing, whose heart was whole, whose future stretched out before them like an open road instead of a wall they kept hitting. His phone buzzed. Another text from Robert spoke to the board. They want to hear from you next week. Take your time, family first. Always. Thomas set down the phone and looked at his daughter, at the monitors showing her strong, steady heartbeat, at the face that looked so much like Sarah's, at the future that had nearly been stolen and was now stretching out before them full of possibilities he'd been afraid to imagine. We did it, Sarah. Our baby's going to be okay. He whispered it to the empty room, to the ghost that lived in his memory, to the woman who'd given him everything and asked for nothing, except that he keep their daughter safe. He could almost feel her beside him, a warmth that had nothing to do with the hospital's heating system, a presence that 8 years of grief could never quite erase that lived in Lily's laugh, and her stubborn determination and her capacity for forgiveness that she'd somehow inherited, despite never meeting the mother who'd embodied it. 6 months changed everything and nothing. The bank was different now. Anyone who walked through those doors could feel it immediately. The marble floors still gleamed, the chandeliers still sparkled, the oil paintings of stern-faced founders still lined the walls. But something underneath had shifted like a building whose foundation had been quietly reinforced while everyone was looking elsewhere. Thomas Bennett stood in the lobby on a Tuesday morning, wearing the same flannel shirt he'd worn that day 6 months ago. Robert Harrison had tried to buy him an entire wardrobe suits that cost more than Thomas spent on groceries in a year, but Thomas had refused with the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly who he was and had no interest in pretending to be anyone else. The day I start dressing to impress people is the day I've forgotten who I am. So flannel it was. Flannel and work boots and hands that still bore the calluses of 29 years swinging hammers and carrying lumber, even though he spent most of his time now in meetings and budget reviews and conversations about community impact metrics. Lily raced ahead of him, her sneakers squeaking against the marble. Not the careful, measured steps of a sick child protecting a damaged heart. The wild, joyful sprint of an 8-year-old with too much energy and not enough patience for fathers who moved like old men. Daddy, come on. You're so slow. I'm old, sweetheart. Old people move carefully. You're not old. Grandpa was old. You're just medium. Thomas laughed. He laughed a lot these days. It still felt strange sometimes, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. But Lily's laughter made his own feel natural again, made him remember that joy wasn't something you had to earn or deserve. It was just there, waiting, if you could find the courage to reach for it. They were here for the dedication ceremony. The bank was unveiling a new wing, a community center built into the space that had once been Margaret Sinclair's corner office. It would house financial literacy classes, scholarship application assistance, and a children's reading room where kids whose parents couldn't afford books could spend Saturday afternoons lost in stories about dragons and detectives and worlds where hard work always led to happy endings. The plaque outside would read, "The Michael Bennett Community Center, building futures one family at a time." Thomas hadn't wanted his father's name on it. He'd argued with Robert for weeks, his voice getting quieter as his position got firmer the way it always did when something mattered enough to fight for. It should be Sarah's name, or just call it the community center. Nobody needs to know who paid for it. Robert had shaken his head with the patience of someone who'd learned that some arguments were worth having even when you knew you'd lose. Thomas, your father spent his whole life making sure other people's names went on buildings. He never asked for recognition. Don't you think it's time someone gave it to him anyway? Thomas had finally agreed, not for himself, for Lily, so that someday when she was older, she could point to that plaque and say, "My great-grandfather built this city," and he never forgot where he came from. The lobby was filling with people now, board members in expensive suits that broadcast success louder than words ever could. Community leaders in Sunday best, the kind of clothes you kept wrapped in plastic for weddings and funerals and moments that mattered. Journalists with cameras and notebooks already composing stories about redemption and transformation and the power of one man's dignity to reshape an institution. And scattered throughout the crowd, faces Thomas recognized from a very different day. Marcus Washington stood near the front wearing a suit that was still slightly too big for his frame, but perfectly pressed creases sharp enough to cut. He'd been promoted twice in 6 months, assistant branch manager now with a trajectory that Robert called unstoppable, and Marcus approached with the humility of someone who remembered what it felt like to follow orders he knew were wrong. Janet stood near the entrance talking with a group of young tellers she was training. New branch manager, not because Margaret's guilt had handed her the position like consolation prize, but because she'd earned it through 6 months of steady, patient leadership that had transformed the entire culture of the building. People smiled more now, talked to each other like colleagues instead of competitors, treated customers the way Thomas's father had always said they should be treated, like human beings trying to build better lives, not walking bank balances to be assessed and categorized. And in the back, standing alone but not isolated, was Margaret Sinclair. Thomas hadn't expected her to come, hadn't even known she'd been invited until he saw her there, wearing simple clothes that would have horrified the woman she used to be, cotton instead of silk, practical instead of perfect. She was watching the ceremony with eyes that held something complicated, something that looked like regret, mixed with hope, mixed with the quiet determination of someone who'd decided that becoming better was worth the daily humiliation of confronting who you'd been. Robert Harrison approached the microphone at the front of the lobby. The crowd quieted. Conversations trailed off mid-sentence. People turned to face him, and in that moment of collective attention, Thomas could feel the weight of what was about to happen. This wasn't just a building dedication. It was a statement, a promise, a public acknowledgement that they'd been wrong and were trying to be better. Thank you all for being here today. Robert's voice carried across the marble, reaching every corner of the space Michael Bennett had built 26 years ago with concrete and rebar and the belief that honest work mattered more than clever shortcuts. 6 months ago, something happened in this lobby that changed everything I thought I knew about this institution. He paused, looking directly at Thomas. The eye contact lasted just long enough to communicate what words couldn't: gratitude, respect, the recognition that some people change your life just by refusing to let you diminish theirs. A man walked through our doors. He was wearing work clothes. He had his daughter with him. He asked for something simple, a service we provide to thousands of customers every day. And he was treated as if he didn't belong. The silence in the room was heavy with shared memory. Some of these people had been there that day, had watched, had whispered, had made assumptions based on sawdust and flannel. Others had only heard the story passed along through break-room conversations and careful HR memos about new protocols and mandatory sensitivity training. I wish I could tell you that what happened that day was an isolated incident. I wish I could say it was one person's failure, one moment's lapse in judgment. Robert's voice carried the weight of someone confronting institutional rot and finding it deeper than expected. But the truth is harder than that. The truth is that we had built systems, created cultures, hired and promoted people who believed that a person's worth could be measured by their appearance, by what they wore, by how much money they carried, by whether they looked like they belonged in places that smelled like this. His voice cracked slightly, just enough to show that this wasn't performance. This was confession. We were wrong. And it took Thomas Bennett's dignity, his grace, and his refusal to respond to cruelty with cruelty to show us exactly how wrong we were. Lily stood beside her father, her hand slipping into his. She was watching Robert with the fierce attention of a child who understood that something important was happening, even if she couldn't fully articulate what. Her fingers squeezed Thomas's palm, and he squeezed back the silent language they'd developed over 8 years of being each other's whole world. Today we dedicate this community center to Michael Bennett Thomas's father, a man who built half the buildings in this city, a man who never once asked for his name on a wall or his picture in a lobby, a man who believed that honest work and honest treatment of others was its own reward. Robert turned to face the plaque that was still covered by a cloth the color of burgundy. His hand rested on the fabric, but didn't pull yet. There was more to say, more that needed to be witnessed. But more than that, we dedicate this center to every person who has ever been made to feel unwelcome in a place where they had every right to be. Every person who has been judged by their clothes instead of their character. Every person who has been told in words or in actions that they don't belong. He pulled the cloth away. The Michael Bennett Community Center. Building futures. 1. Family at a time. The letters were bronze polished to a shine that caught the chandelier light and threw it back in fragments of gold. The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. But Thomas wasn't looking at the plaque. He was looking at Lily, who was looking at the plaque, her lips moving as she silently read her great-grandfather's name, connecting letters to sound, to meaning, to legacy. Daddy, that's Grandpa Michael. Yeah, sweetheart, that's Grandpa Michael. He's famous now. Her voice carried wonder, the kind only children have before the world teaches them that fame is complicated and legacy is fragile and nothing lasts forever except the choices you make when nobody's watching. He was always famous, just not the kind of famous people notice. Lily thought about that for a moment, her face scrunching up in concentration the way it did when she was trying to understand something bigger than her 8 years of experience could easily contain. I think that's the best kind of famous. Thomas felt his throat tighten. Out of the mouths of babes. Out of the wisdom of children who hadn't yet learned to value the wrong things or measure worth in the wrong currencies. I think you're right. The ceremony continued, speeches from board members about institutional transformation and renewed commitment to community values, testimonials from scholarship recipients whose college educations existed because Sarah Bennett had believed they deserved a chance, and Thomas had turned that belief into funding. A ribbon cutting that Lily insisted on helping with her small hands wrapped around giant scissors alongside Robert Harrison's liver-spotted grip, both of them grinning like they were launching a ship instead of opening a room with books and chairs. And then, just as the crowd was beginning to disperse, something unexpected happened. Margaret Sinclair walked forward. The lobby went quiet again. Not the planned quiet of a ceremony, but the sudden hush of people holding their breath, unsure what was about to happen, whether this would be confrontation or reconciliation, or something messier that didn't fit into neat categories. She stopped in front of Thomas. Her hands were shaking slightly, fingers laced together like she was holding herself still through force of will. When she spoke, her voice was nothing like the sharp, confident tone that had once filled this same space with cruelty disguised as policy. "Mr. Bennett, I wasn't sure if I should come today." Thomas waited, didn't speak. This was her moment, her need, her attempt at something he couldn't name yet but could feel building in the space between them. "I'm not sure I have the right to be here at all, but I needed to say something to you. Something I should have said 6 months ago." Lily pressed closer to her father, watching Margaret with curious eyes that held no fear, just interest. The natural fascination children have with adult emotions they're still learning to navigate. "I've spent the last 6 months at the downtown branch, working as a junior account manager, helping people who look exactly like you did that day." Margaret's voice caught, and she paused to steady it, to push through whatever was threatening to stop her from finishing this public acknowledgement of private shame. "People in work clothes, people with kids, people who just need someone to treat them like human beings instead of problems to be managed or threats to be neutralized." She took a breath that shook on the way in. "And every single day I think about what I did to you, what I almost did to your daughter. How close I came to destroying something precious because I was too blind to see what was right in front of me." Thomas stood quietly. Robert had moved closer, not intervening, but present, bearing witness to whatever transformation was happening in real time. Marcus and Janet watched from their positions, faces showing the complicated emotions of people who'd been hurt by this woman and were now watching her try to become someone different. "I know you asked Mr. Harrison not to fire me. I know you gave me a chance I didn't deserve, and I've spent every day since then trying to understand why. Did you figure it out?" Thomas's question was gentle, genuinely curious, the tone of someone who wanted to know what conclusions another person had reached on their journey toward understanding. Margaret shook her head, a small movement that carried enormous weight. "Not completely, but I think you did it because you understood something I didn't." She looked down at her hands, at the fingers that weren't wearing the designer rings she used to favor, at the nails that were short and practical instead of manicured and perfect. That people aren't their worst moments. That the same hands that tear down can also learn to build up. That grace isn't about what someone deserves, it's about what you choose to give. The words hung in the lobby, mixing with the smell of new carpet from the community center, and the faint scent of coffee from the break room, and the accumulated weight of 26 years of transactions that had happened in this space, without anyone stopping to ask whether they were building something that mattered or just moving money from one account to another. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not sure I've earned it yet." Margaret's voice was steady now, certain in a way that came from having made a decision and choosing to live with its consequences regardless of the outcome. "But I wanted you to know that you changed something in me, something that had been broken for a very long time." Thomas looked at this woman who had caused him such pain, who had made his daughter feel small, who had represented everything ugly about power wielded without conscience, and he saw something different than he had seen 6 months ago. He saw someone trying, someone fighting to become better than she had been. Someone who understood that transformation was possible, but only if you were willing to do the daily work of choosing differently. Ms. Sinclair, do you know what my father used to say about people? She shook her head. He used to say that every person is a building under construction. Some of us have solid foundations. Some of us have cracks that run deep, but as long as we're still standing, there's a chance to make repairs. Thomas extended his hand. The gesture was simple, but carried meaning that went beyond politeness, beyond social convention, into territory where human beings acknowledge each other's efforts to be better than their histories suggest they should be. I think you've been making repairs, and I think that takes courage. More courage than it took me to stand in this lobby 6 months ago. Margaret stared at his hand for a long moment. Then she took it, her grip firm despite the trembling, her eyes wet, despite her obvious determination not to cry in front of all these people who'd witnessed her fall and were now witnessing something that might be her resurrection. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Call me Thomas. We're going to be working together after all. Her eyes widened confusion, replacing the gratitude that had been there a moment before. What? Robert Harrison stepped forward, a slight smile on his face that suggested he'd been waiting for this moment, had orchestrated. It even had decided that some announcements were better made publicly so no one could later claim they hadn't understood the message. Margaret, I've been watching your progress at the downtown branch. Your customer satisfaction ratings are the highest in the company. Your team's retention rate is remarkable. And 3 different community organizations have sent letters praising your leadership. Margaret was speechless, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to form words but couldn't find any that fit the shape of what was happening. I'm not offering you your old position back. Robert let that sink in. Let her feel the weight of what she'd lost before he revealed what she might gain. I'm offering you something different. A new role we've created as part of the Bennett Community Initiative, Director of Customer Dignity. Your job would be to train every employee in this company on how to treat people with respect regardless of how they look or how much money they have. I don't understand. After what I did, what you did was terrible. Robert's interruption was firm but not cruel, stating facts without judgment, laying out reality as it existed rather than as anyone wished it could be. But what you've done since then has been remarkable. And Thomas convinced me that the best person to teach people not to make your mistakes is someone who actually made them and found a way to change. Margaret looked at Thomas, and in her eyes was something he recognized because he'd felt it himself, the day Lily woke up from surgery and told him about dreaming of Sarah, the overwhelming confusion that comes from receiving something you never expected, never thought you deserved, could never repay. You did this. I suggested it. Robert made the decision. Why? The question was almost a whisper, barely audible over the ambient sounds of the lobby, the rustle of people shifting weight and clearing throats and trying not to stare too obviously at the drama unfolding in front of them. Thomas thought about the question, about his father's calloused hands and Sarah's belief in every student she taught and Lily's resilient heart and the way all of it had come together to make him who he was, someone who understood that the most beautiful things in life were the ones that survived being broken and came back stronger in the fractured places. My dad used to say that the most beautiful buildings aren't the ones that were built perfectly. They're the ones that were damaged and repaired. That's where you see the real craftsmanship. Not in avoiding cracks, but in filling them with something stronger. The lobby was absolutely still. Even the people who'd started to leave had stopped, drawn back by the gravity of what was happening, by the sense that they were witnessing something rare and important and true. Margaret Sinclair, the woman who had once tried to throw Thomas Bennett out of this bank, stood in the lobby she had terrorized for 12 years and wept openly. Not tears of shame alone, though shame was part of it. Tears of something harder to name. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. or the overwhelming weight of being given a chance you never expected to receive and suddenly understanding that the rest of your life would be about proving worthy of it. Lily tugged Thomas's hand. He knelt down to her level the way he always did when she had something to say that mattered, the way his father had knelt down to him when he was 8 and full of questions about why the world worked the way it did. "Daddy, why is the lady crying?" "Because sometimes, sweetheart, people cry when something good happens, when they feel things that are too big for words. Like happy tears. Kind of. More like hope tears. Tears that happen when you realize that even if you've messed up really badly, there's still a chance to do better." Lily considered this with the serious expression she had inherited from her mother, the look that meant she was thinking hard about something and wouldn't be satisfied with simple answers. "I cried like that when I woke up after my surgery, when you told me my heart was fixed." "Exactly like that, baby." Lily looked at Margaret, who was wiping her eyes and trying to compose herself while failing completely because some emotions are bigger than composure can contain. "Excuse me, Miss Lady." Margaret looked down at the little girl's surprise, replacing grief on her face, and Thomas felt his heart clench because this was the moment that would define whether the last 6 months had actually changed anything, or whether they'd all just been pretending that damage could be undone with good intentions and corporate training programs. "Yes, I remember you from before. You were mean to my daddy." The words hung in the air, simple, direct, unadorned by adult politeness or social convention. Just truth from someone too young to understand that sometimes you're supposed to pretend the past didn't happen. Margaret flinched but didn't look away. "Yes, I was. I'm very sorry." Lily nodded seriously, like she was a judge weighing evidence and coming to a verdict. "My daddy says that when people are mean, it's usually because they're hurting inside." "Were you hurting inside?" The question was so innocent, so completely devoid of malice, that it seemed to strip away every defense Margaret had been building, every careful explanation she'd constructed about systems and protocols and the pressures of maintaining standards. "Yes, I think I was. For a very long time." "Does it hurt less now?" Margaret looked at Thomas, at Robert, at Marcus and Janet, and all the people who had witnessed her fall and were now witnessing something that might be redemption, or might just be the first small step on a very long road. "Yes, it hurts less now." Lily smiled. The kind of smile that only children can give, free of calculation, full of simple acceptance, uncomplicated by the layers of judgment and resentment that adults accumulate like sediment. "Good. Because my daddy says that helping people feel better is the most important job there is. He learned it from my mommy. She was a teacher." "Your mommy sounds wonderful." "She was. She's in heaven now, but she watches us. She told me so in a dream." Margaret knelt down to Lily's level, and Thomas watched carefully, ready to intervene if needed. But what he saw in Margaret's face wasn't cruelty or condescension. It was something softer, something that looked like the person she might have been before life taught her that being hard was safer than being kind. "Can I tell you something?" Lily nodded. "Your daddy is the best person I've ever met, and you're very lucky to have him." Lily grinned, the full-face smile that made her look exactly like Sarah had looked in the wedding photos Thomas still kept on his nightstand. "I know. He makes really good pancakes, too." The tension broke. People laughed. The ceremony that had been solemn and heavy suddenly felt lighter, warmer, more human. Thomas lifted Lily onto his hip, feeling her arms wrap around his neck. She was getting too big for this 52 pounds now healthy weight gained back after surgery, but he didn't care. These moments were numbered, and he was going to hold on to every single one. Robert approached them, his own eyes suspiciously wet, not bothering to hide the emotion that came from watching something impossible become real in front of him. "Thomas, I want to show you something." He led them through the lobby, past the new community center, past the reading room where children's books lined the shelves in rainbow organization, past the scholarship office where young people's futures would be built one application at a time. At the end of the hallway was a door Thomas hadn't noticed before. Robert opened it. Inside was a small room simply furnished: a desk, a chair, a window overlooking the city, and on the wall, 2 photographs. One was Michael Bennett, taken sometime in the 90s. He was standing in front of a building under construction covered in concrete dust, grinning at the camera like a man who knew exactly what his life meant and wouldn't trade it for anything. The other was Sarah Bennett, in her classroom, surrounded by students, her hand on the shoulder of a young boy who was looking up at her like she had just told him he could be anything he wanted to be. "This is your office, if you want it." Thomas stared at the photographs, at his father's smile, at his wife's gentle hands, at the evidence that the people who had made him possible had been real and good and worthy of being remembered. "I had them printed from pictures you sent me. I hope that's okay." "It's more than okay." Thomas's voice came out rough, scraped, raw by emotion he couldn't quite name. Gratitude mixed with grief, mixed with the complicated joy of seeing the people you loved frozen in moments when they were happy and whole and didn't know yet that time was finite and every good thing eventually ended. "I thought you might want them close when you're here doing the work they inspired." Thomas set Lily down. She walked to the photographs and studied them carefully, tracing the outline of Michael's face with one finger, not touching the glass but close enough that her breath fogged it slightly. "That's Grandpa Michael." "Yes, sweetheart." "And that's Mommy." "Yes." Lily turned to her father, her face serious in the way only children's faces can be, unguarded, honest, showing every emotion without the filters that adults learn to apply. "Daddy, I think they're proud of you." Thomas felt the tears come, and for once he didn't try to stop them. He gathered Lily into his arms and held her tight, standing in the small office that represented everything his family had built and everything they had yet to build, surrounded by the ghosts of people who had loved him well enough that he could love others the same way. Robert quietly stepped out, closing the door behind him, leaving Thomas alone with his daughter and the photographs of the people who had made them both possible. Outside the window, the city stretched toward the horizon. Buildings that Michael Bennett had constructed, schools where Sarah Bennett had taught, streets where ordinary people lived. Ordinary lives, unaware that in a small office in a bank that had almost lost its soul, a man was making a silent promise. To his father, who had taught him that honest work mattered. To his wife, who had taught him that every person deserved to be believed in. To his daughter, who had taught him that love was stronger than any disease, any loss, any cruelty the world could offer. And to himself, the man who had walked into this bank 6 months ago asking only to check his balance and had somehow ended up with something far more valuable: a chance to build. Ready to go home. Thomas looked at Lily, at the girl who had survived leukemia and heart surgery, and a world that had tried more than once to break her, and saw nothing but strength wrapped in pink sneakers and a butterfly t-shirt. "Can we get ice cream first?" "Always." "Chocolate." "Whatever you want." They walked out of the office hand in hand past the community center and the reading room and the scholarship office and all the other monuments to human dignity that had risen from the ashes of one terrible day. In the lobby, Marcus waved at them. Janet smiled. Margaret, still composing herself, managed a small nod of gratitude that Thomas returned with the understanding that forgiveness was a process, not a moment, and she was doing the work even when it was hard. Robert Harrison stood by the entrance watching them go with the expression of a man who had rediscovered something. He thought he'd lost forever. The belief that institutions could change, that people could become better, that the measure of a life well lived wasn't what you accumulated, but what you gave away. The revolving door pushed Thomas and Lily out into afternoon sun. The city waited for them buildings to construct children, to educate people who needed to be reminded that their worth wasn't measured by bank accounts or wardrobes or anything that could be bought or sold or traded. Thomas Bennett, construction worker, widower, father, and now chairman of community initiatives for First Union Bank, walked down the steps with his daughter. Behind them, the bank doors closed softly, but the legacy they had built there would remain open forever. "Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart. I love you." The words were simple. 3 syllables that children threw around carelessly, not yet understanding their weight or power, or how much they could mean to someone who'd been afraid of losing the person saying them. "I love you too, Lily. More than all the money in all the banks in the whole world." "That's a lot of money." Her giggle was bright, uncomplicated, the sound of someone who understood that love was better than wealth, even if she couldn't articulate why. "And you're worth more than all of it." Lily skipped ahead, sneakers bright against the concrete sidewalk, hair bouncing with each step, the picture of health that 6 months ago had been nothing but desperate hope, wrapped in prayer. Thomas followed, carrying nothing but the weight of his own gratitude and the memory of everyone who had helped him become the man he was. His father who had built with his hands, his wife who had built with her heart, his daughter who was building him into someone better every single day, and a city full of strangers who were slowly becoming neighbors, one small act of dignity at a time. The story that had begun with humiliation ended with something far more powerful than revenge. It ended with legacy. It ended with hope. It ended with the simple, stubborn truth that no amount of cruelty can destroy a person who refuses to become cruel in return. Thomas Bennett had walked into that bank to check his balance. He had walked out with something worth more than any number on any screen. A heart that could still love. A spirit that could still forgive. A man who had been broken and repaired stronger in the places where the fractures had healed. The sun was warm on his face as he caught up with Lily and took her hand. Together they walked toward ice cream and home, and all the ordinary miracles that make a life worth living. The marble lobby was behind them now, but what they had built there would last. Not because it was carved in bronze or written in policy manuals, but because it had changed the people who witnessed it, had shown them that transformation was possible if you were willing to do the hard work of becoming better than your worst moment. And in a city that measured worth by wealth and power by position, that was the most revolutionary act of all, choosing to measure people by how they treated others when nothing required them to be kind. Choosing to build foundations instead of walls. Choosing to believe that everyone deserved respect not because of what they had, but because of who they were. Human beings, trying to build better lives, deserving of dignity, all of them, every single one. That was Michael Bennett's legacy. That was Sarah Bennett's gift. And that was the future Thomas and Lily were walking toward together. One small step, one act of grace, one choice to be better at a time. The city stretched out before them, vast and full of possibility. And somewhere in its heart, a bank stood as testament to the idea that people could change, that institutions could transform that cruelty, didn't have to be met with cruelty, and that the truest measure of strength was choosing mercy when you had every right to choose revenge. The story was finished, but the work, the real work of building a world where everyone belonged, was just beginning.